The college football playoff semifinals are upon us. And when I say these very well could be the best games of the year, I mean it. On one hand, we've got a matchup between a historically successful program that is getting back in the spotlight and has success in the past, but is on the way back. We've got another program who had success a very, very long ago, but under new leadership. A new coach has taken the helm who has very literally navigated his team through a hurricane, navigating the media, navigating players in his own building, navigating the coaches on his own staff. We'll talk about it. And in the second game, we'll see the replaying of the early season matchup that didn't go the best for a program that has been one of the best in college football in the past few years. And the team who won, welcome. Welcome to the group, because this second team, the victor in that first matchup, has put together possibly the greatest turnaround in the history of the sport. We'll talk about that game later. They say it's hard to beat a team twice, but that team could very well make it that much easier. We'll talk about both matchups on today's episode. And the semifinals are here, and I'm here to talk about it. So I'm Drury, and this is the Drury Show, so don't go anywhere. Well, to say that intro fired me up is an understatement. We're filming this episode Wednesday night as we're going on recording as I press record on my laptop. It's 8:48 on January 7th, the eve before the Fiesta Bowl, the Vrbo Fiesta Bowl. And so as we talk about it, any odds, I say, just have in mind that they could fluctuate on game day, and these are all coming. I'm all talking about them the night before the game. I said this is the Fiesta Bowl. This is a matchup between the 10th ranked Miami Hurricanes and the 6th ranked Ole Miss Rebels. And if you liked my little bit of a pun, no pun intended, well, I did intend the pun wholeheartedly. Pete Golding, leading this Ole Miss Rebels roster, has very literally navigated a hurricane. And maybe not as literally that Ole Miss and Oxford, Mississippi was met with inclement weather, but really every single obstacle that you could imagine has been thrown on that Ole Miss team this season. And Pete Golding is defying the odds, leading his team to this stage of the playoffs. Now, both of these teams, unlike Indiana, who we'll touch on a little bit later, both of these teams has played 2 games in the college football playoff. And Ole Miss, out of the two, has probably been a little bit more tested this season. But we now know that throw previous strength of schedule, resume, metrics, whatever it may be, throw those out the window, because Miami has shown that they are a true contender, and this game is going to be challenging for Ole Miss. Now, for Miami, they're coming off one of the best wins in college football this year, and that is beating Ohio State in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic. Now, for Ole Miss, they had, maybe it's not as good of a win in that the opponent wasn't as good as the team Miami beat, but if we're thinking about how much it means for the program, Ole Miss might get the upper hand here. They're coming off of a thrilling upset win. Heck, the referees did give Georgia multiple opportunities. How unlikely they would be, that doesn't matter. But the referees tried to keep whatever it may be, the stage crew of that stadium, they tried to keep them off the field. They brought the stage on the field multiple times, but they had to roll it back off. Heck, Pete Golding got covered in Gatorade and had to get back on the sideline to coach the last play. It was a thrilling upset. It was a thrilling upset win for the Ole Miss Rebels against the number 3 ranked Georgia Bulldogs. Now here, I'm going to break down the keys for both teams. First off, starting with the underdog. The underdog, according to seed, not based on betting metrics, whatever it may be. But we're going to start with Miami and their keys. Now, it starts on defense. And Especially in college football, in the college football playoff, you have to oftentimes base predictions, coverage, opinions on a team. You have to base them off of how they perform in the earlier rounds of the playoff, not how they did earlier in the season. And that has been the case with Miami. Some say, oh, they did barely get into the college football playoff. At that 10 spot, they're the lowest ranked Power Four school. So they barely got in. But we're at this point where we can truly base our predictions off of whatever it may be because we have a body of evidence of this Miami team in the college football playoff. And the thing that I will start with is the last round against Ohio State. Now, your first thought is going to be, well, Miami knocked off the second ranked Ohio State Buckeyes. That's a great thing. And I'm not going to say it isn't. Now, we can take even more away from it. We can take more away from it, which I think is even better to do. As we can kind of pick things that I like about the game for Miami and use those as predictive factors for this Ole Miss game. And the first thing I will think about is the defense against the quarterback. And, you're never really going to have two quarterbacks who are completely alike. But Miami's quarterback defense against the quarterback in that game against Ohio State is textbook perfection. Maybe not perfection, but it's very, very good for Miami. And here's why. Julian Sayin, who placed fourth in Heisman voting, he was there in New York along with Fernando Mendoza, Jeremiah Love, Diego Pavia, and he was there. Unfortunately, he places fourth and misses out on the trophy. But in any right, Julian Sayin is a great quarterback. And so going into this game, Miami had their work cut out for them. And they played to the script, their own script, perfectly. Here's why. Julian Sayin was allowed to have a good passing game. Not because he threw for a bunch of touchdowns or because he set up a lot of drives or whatever it may be, because he did do that in some cases, but he had a great game in passing yards. Great. I think he had upwards of almost 300 passing yards. And so if you're looking at a box score, statistics, whatever it may be, if you look at that and see that Julian Sayin threw for that many yards against Miami, you would probably think that Ohio State won that game somewhat comfortably. However, Miami was a 10-point. They won the game by 10 points. Why is that? Well, the statistics you don't see in that stat report of just the yardage is the two interceptions that Julian Sayin threw and the two interceptions that Miami forced. Why do I say this? It's because Miami was able to do something in that game that not many teams can do. And that is, they played great defense when it mattered most. And what do I mean by that? That's not me saying that Miami was asleep for the majority of each drive, but at the very last second, they came in and got stops and were able to get the ball back or just prevent Ohio State from scoring. In some cases, that's true. But it's lengthening drives. It's making drives go on as long as possible. Making Julian Sayin beat Miami with short screen passes or short checkdowns of 15 to 20 yards. It's not letting Julian Sayin throw all over you for 50 to 60-yard gains. That's not what Miami let him do. And that is why, in big part, Miami came away with that win. Miami, because they were able to do this, they gave their offense more opportunities to score. And in football, offensive possessions are sometimes hard to come by. And so for Miami to do that on the defensive side of the ball is a great, great win for them. And how will they do that in this Ole Miss game? Let me lay out the steps. They need to have dominant pressure up front from the physical D-line. If you go back and watch my quarterfinal prediction preview show, mega show, whatever you want to call it, I talked a lot about how much of a physical battle that would be up front for both Ohio State and Miami in that game. And that is because of how physical the D-line is for the Hurricanes. Led by Ruben Bain and Akeem Messidor, this D-line is very, very physical, and they need to have dominant pressure in this game. But here's the difference, is that Julian's saying in large part, he can run. He has a good pair of legs on him. However, he's a very traditional pocket passer. He likes to stay in the pocket. Why is that? Because he had a very Ohio State had a very good offensive line, so he's able to stay in the pocket and pass from there. But in this game, Miami versus Ole Miss, Miami's facing off against a very, very different quarterback. That and the likes of Trinidad Chambliss. And if you haven't heard of who Trinidad Chambliss is, you're sleeping under a rock. Because, and I said in my early, before even the college football playoff started, and even just to my friends, I've been on the Trinidad Chambliss train since day one. And I shouted him out last time out for the Ben Drury Show College Football Edition. I'll shout him out again. Kylan Craig, one of my best friends, we have been on Trinidad Chambliss since day one. And so Miami needs to limit him. And it's going to be a different challenge because Trinidad Chambliss does something that is very, very challenging for defenses. That's not just that he's able to make hard throws. That's not that he can just run over you, but he destroys pressures like it's nothing. You could bring the hardest front ever, and he just slips through like nothing ever, there is nothing happening to him. But here's the thing. The Georgia defensive line, the Tulane defensive line are very, very different than this Miami defensive line. I just watched a clip on Twitter talking about how Ruben Bain and that defensive line, while they are very, very big, very tall, very strong, whatever it may be, they are very, very versatile. They're very athletic. They're very mobile. They're very fast. And that's what you need. I have it written down here. That's what you need to defend a very, very mobile quarterback in Trinidad Chambliss. You have to be able to get out and run to defend the very, very mobile likes of Trinidad Chambliss. So that means if coverage is broken and Trinidad Chambliss needs to scramble, it means that while you may not get the sack, while you may not get a tackle for loss, you need to get after him and maybe only give up a 3 to 4 yard gain. That's what that looks like for Miami. Now, that's Miami's defense. Now, on offense, and don't worry, we'll get to Ole Miss. Now, on offense for Miami, Miami needs to play just like they did last time out. And this means they can't solely rely on Malachi Toney, who is their star freshman wide receiver. Some believe he's the best freshman wide receiver in college football, maybe even the best, period. And that's an argument for a different day. It can't just be a one-dimensional pass attack or offensive attack from the Hurricanes in that focusing purely on Malachi Toney. They also were able to run the ball well in that game against Ohio State. And, kind of wear down that Ohio State defense with that run game, and then that opens it up for the pass. Miami needs to do that in this game as well. They need to have a complementary pass game that is aggressive. I've said it multiple times. I said it before the Ohio State game, and I've been saying it before that Miami needs big game Carson Beck to succeed. And being a big game quarterback means a lot of different things for a lot of different quarterbacks. For some, it means they have to throw for 400 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. That's not the case for Carson Beck. I think a big game for him would be 200 yards, a touchdown, and 0 interceptions. I think that would be a big game. Why do I think that? Well, a big game for Carson Beck, as opposed to other quarterbacks, is not having a bad one. And I'll say it again, that doesn't always mean the same thing. Just because you have a good game, just because you have a bad game, or let me think about how I will phrase this. Sometimes having a good game means just not having a bad one. Escaping that. And it's because it's not just a two-sided coin, where sometimes it is, but it's not always that case. Where Miami, and really Carson Beck more specifically, when he doesn't have good games, meaning he throws an interception, he can't get the ball out, he's not making the right reads and reading the defense. Whenever he does that, when Carson Beck is unable to do that and doesn't play well, Miami doesn't play well. The games where Carson Beck doesn't throw an interception, gets the ball out well, reads the defense well, Miami wins. You know what one of those games was? The Cotton Bowl. And so one of the things I mean by this is that Miami needs to put Carson Beck in positions to fail. And those are the best situations for him to succeed. Why do I say that? Well, I look back to the game against Texas A&M in the first round of the college football playoff, where very, very windy. So whenever it's windy, you can't always call the most aggressive passing plays and offensive schemes, whatever it may be. And so Carson Beck wasn't given opportunities to have big games, had to have a big game, or opportunities to throw for many yards or throw for a lot of the touchdowns because it just wasn't able. Miami wasn't aggressive enough. And yes, Miami wins that game, but they only put up 10 points. Is that because Miami had not a very good kicker on the day? Hopefully he's improved to this point and he misses multiple field goals. Yes, that is part of it. But Miami could have put more points up on the board. That's me considering the win. So in that second round against Ohio State, they played more aggressive. They put Carson Beck in more opportunities to fail, which are the best opportunities for players to succeed. And look what happened. Miami comes away with their best win of the season to get them to the semifinals. Now, flipping sides on the other side of the field, on the other sideline, the first key is just not letting Miami do any of the things I just told you. That's how you win a football game if you're Ole Miss. But how do you do that? What are the tangible, what are the ways that Ole Miss will be able to carry out that game plan? Here's one. Ole Miss needs to get Kewan Lacey going. This will be crucial. This will be very, very important. Because whenever you have a very, very physical, when you have a very, very fast defensive line in the Miami defensive unit, having a good running back who really penetrates the middle and, spreads the field and gets that defensive line spread out as much as possible. Whenever you have a mobile quarterback in the likes of Trinidad Chambliss, those are the situations where you will see big, big gains for the Ole Miss Rebels and great, great offensive success for Pete Golding's unit. And so that's what Ole Miss needs to do. So Trinidad Chambliss is great at going against hard pressures. He's great at having, seeing the defense, deciding what to do and going to do it and doing it well. And Ole Miss, kind of in a similar way as Miami, they need to have a complementary offense as well. Running to pass, going inside so you can go outside to use basketball. And so Ole Miss needs to do that because it will spread out the defense and will pay large dividends for the passing game, which has been not the lifeline for Ole Miss this season, but has been a very, very crucial player. And the second and final thing, I realize I talked a lot about Miami. So there's only one or two things for Ole Miss. But the first key is just not letting Miami play the way they want to play. Very, very simple. Now, the second thing is that the Ole Miss defense, still led by Pete Golding, who is the defensive coordinator up until this point, needs to make Carson Beck uncomfortable. Because Carson Beck, when he's uncomfortable, he does not play good. This has been the case at Georgia. This has been the case pretty much all season long against Miami. And yes, Miami's offensive line has improved to a certain extent, but Ole Miss, it's going to be crucial for Ole Miss to get Carson Beck under pressure and uncomfortable, because one interception leading to a touchdown in this game could truly, truly pay a lot of dividends if it gets into a track race, which tends to happen with Ole Miss this season. Because just once again, and really this plays with a lot of quarterbacks, when they're under pressure, when they're made uncomfortable, they can do one of two things. They can either kind of turtle up and get in their shell and, take a sack or throw it away or throw an interception, or they explode out the pocket, take that uncomfortability, and take all of that pressure and make a great play out of it. Who's Carson Beck going to be? Let Carson Beck decide that, and let Ole Miss force him to make that decision and truly make it a very, very hard one at that. Make that pressure so hard that it makes that decision for Carson Beck a hard one to make. The line sits for this game. The line sits, given I'm using FanDuel odds for this show. The line sits for Miami at 3.5 points. A little bit over a field goal, 3.5 points for Miami. Now, as always, we use the BTN, the by the numbers spreads, to also kind of help and think about these spreads given by the traditional sports books. And the BTN for this game favors Miami, but only by 1.5 points. I tend to lean that way. I think Ole Miss will come away with the win in this one. So I'm picking them to win. And yeah, I'm picking them to win outright. Not only to cover the 3.5 point spread, but I think they will win outright. Ole Miss has been a very, very good story. I'm not picking them because their story's better, but they have a great story, and I think it will continue on to the college football playoff championship, which, newsflash, if they get to that game, it will not, and if they were to win, knock on wood, if they were to win, it will not be their first national championship. They won one in the 60s. ESPN keeps saying they haven't won one, but they have. So I'm picking them to win this game. I'm picking them to win the Vrbo Fiesta Bowl. Mario Cristobal's team, Carson Beck, will be going home to Miami tomorrow night to early Friday morning. That's enough said on the Fiesta Bowl. I'm going to get a drink of water. It's very late as we get to 9:08 on this January 7th, Wednesday in 2026. Happy New Year. The Peach Bowl. This is going to be the Miami Ole Miss game. It's going to be a great matchup, but this Peach Bowl is going to be another great one. This will take place 6:30 on ESPN on Friday night. And this game we've had a few times in this college football playoff where we've had repeated matchups where Ole Miss, last round, they played Georgia. They played them earlier in the season. This game's the same way. We've got number 5th ranked Oregon facing off against number 1 ranked Indiana. And this game, the first time, was at Oregon. It was the host of College Game Day. And it played out very, very well for Indiana. They come away with the win, 30-20, and they didn't pull away late, but they had a very small lead, 3 to 7 point lead in that game, and they were able to just keep it going all game long and finally pull away to win by 10, 30-20. And so Indiana didn't dominate, but they controlled that first matchup. And even though Oregon had an early pick 6 in that matchup, Indiana won 30-20. And saying this, and this is very similar to talking about the Notre Dame-Miami game, which that was a few weeks earlier, but week 1 of college football. You can't really use that as much because both teams are very, very different at this point in the season. One isn't playing in Notre Dame, and the other is, Miami. But I'm going to use the same logic for Oregon, Indiana. This game, you can look at it a little bit, but not all the way. You can't base your predictions. Not too many people do, but I'm just saying that. You can't base your predictions based on what happened the first time. And you also, some people are saying that, Oregon won the first time and both teams are different, but really Oregon's the only one who's improved, so Oregon's going to win this game. I disagree. We'll get to my picks a little bit later, But I think Indiana will win. And how have they both improved? Well, like I said, Oregon had an early pick six in that first matchup. And so the point I'm going to talk about is that Indiana has improved in quarterback play. And because at that point in the season, Fernando Mendoza was not the Heisman favorite. I don't know what the FanDuel odds were looking like at that point, but he was not a contender at that point. And that pick six from, I think it was like the Indiana 30, maybe even lower than that, was not Heisman football, was not a Heisman game. But here's the thing. Fernando Mendoza has played Heisman football, and he played it probably his best game of the season just last week in the 38-3 sheer and utter domination of the Alabama Crimson Tide by the Indiana Hoosiers. So definitely Indiana's made improvements in quarterback play. Now, Oregon, on the other side of the ball for Oregon, has had spectacular play on defense. And they've limited explosive offenses like Texas Tech, who they played last week, to either zero or very, very limited amounts of points. And I'll say it. Coming off of that James Madison game for Oregon, I was a little bit, maybe not skeptical. Skeptical is not the right word, but I was a little bit, there was a hint of concern for Oregon's defense, knowing that, yes, they put in the backups, but they still gave up 34 points to James Madison. But Dan Lanning, he doesn't watch my show yet, but he took that to heart. And in that Texas Tech game, Oregon wins 23-0. And I said it, Texas Tech was one of the best explosive offenses in the country, but Oregon came in there and didn't have a care in the world. And they limit them to 0 points and shut them out. So Oregon has improved on the defensive side of the ball exponentially this season. Now I've got two keys for success for both teams. Starting with Indiana, the number one team in the country. I truly think they are the best team in the country. And I'll keep saying it. They're not a storybook. They are a storybook team, meaning that they are historically doing things that have never been done for Indiana. But they're not a storybook team thinking that this will be the last time it'll ever happen and it's a Cinderella run. They are truly the best team in the country, and they're not getting any more credit because they are a Cinderella team. That's not the truth. And with that being said, Indiana to have success in this game means that they have to limit Dante more, and more specifically, his explosiveness on offense. And they need to hold receivers to minimal large gains. And really, wins for Indiana on defense will be having long, sustained defensive drives. I'm going to talk a little bit on the flip side of what that means for Oregon, and it may sound a little bit different, but those long, sustained drives could be a win for Indiana, meaning that it's not going to be a high-scoring affair if Oregon has a limited possessions. And if we look at the games Indiana has played in close margins, that game against Ohio State or the Oregon game earlier in the season, they thrive in close games down to the wire. Or that Penn State game where Fernando Mendoza, starting off with a sack, has to execute an almost perfect 2-minute drill offense. And when thinking about this, I key into Indiana's performance against Ohio State in that Big Ten championship game, where Oregon has offensive weapons. Their names may not be as known as Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith of Ohio State, but Indiana needs to do what they did to Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith in the game against Ohio State. They need to do that in limiting the amounts of times they have deep receptions down the field. They need to limit that and do it the same way to Oregon. And I'm not going to say it. I will say it again. Now, a win for Indiana, or at least a small marginal win for Indiana in the defensive battle, will be staying on the field. And I'll talk about the flip side and what that means for Oregon. But the second point for Indiana is its run game. I was watching that Alabama game, and Indiana's running backs were just tearing the Tide's defensive front to shreds, sprinting through the first level into the second level a few times with breakneck speed. Very, very fast, very agile, and very, very mobile running backs for Indiana. They're not the biggest running backs. They're not the most built, but they're very, very fast, and that's going to be important because that run game is going to be crucial in that it needs to be complementary. I talk about it a lot that offenses need to be complementary, and no team with a one-dimensional offense truly has that much success. The case is no different for Indiana in this matchup. That the run game and Mendoza's pass attack must complement each other, because if it does, if the run game does what it needs to do, it will allow Mendoza more time in the pocket, which is just going to do Indiana so many favors. Whenever Fernando Mendoza had unharmed passes in the pocket in the Rose Bowl, he was able to execute great deep ball threats. And that's what they need in this game. The run game will break up that defensive front from Oregon, which is very, very good, and allow Fernando Mendoza to not only make those good passes, but allow him some more time. And even if it leads to a check down or a scramble out, it just lets him and takes off that pressure, maybe not giving up as many sacks, but it allows Fernando Mendoza to make better decisions with the football, which is going to be an important key to this game. Kind of on the same note, on the other side for Oregon, I have it written here that Oregon needs to get after the quarterback and make Mendoza uncomfortable. Fernando Mendoza doesn't make many mistakes, but when he does, and all mistakes come like this, mistakes come when a quarterback is uncomfortable. And Oregon, if they do make the quarterback uncomfortable at a high rate, which they did in the game against Texas Tech, if they carry that logic, if they carry that over to this game, we could see Fernando Mendoza throwing a pick or 2 interceptions. Who knows what will happen? But it is important that Oregon ratchets up the pressure of that defensive front. And really, because, and I just talked about how the run game and pass game needs to be complementary for Indiana, is that Oregon can kind of stop that if they shut off one or the other. Because if they shut off one and make Indiana one-dimensional on the other, that's when you make the most mistakes if you're Indiana. So that's what Oregon needs to do, and they'll have success if they're able to do that. The second and final point is that Dante Moore and Indiana need to keep the offense of Indiana off the field by keeping Indiana defense on the field. Long, sustained drives. And I said that this is kind of a two-headed thing where for one team it means one thing and for the other it means another. Where in some cases the defense for Indiana could be a win. Could be a win if they're on the field for a long time. But not if those drives for Oregon end in touchdowns. It's a win if it's a 12-point drive, if it's a 12-minute, not a 12-minute, but if it's an 8 to 10-minute drive for Oregon and it ends in a field goal, or maybe it ends in a punt. Those are wins. However, Indiana doesn't want Dante Moore to go down the field, hold it however long as he wants, win the time of possession battle, and put up six points with an extra point tagged on there. And so Indiana, if they want to have success, they need to limit Oregon's performance in the time of possession battle. You can win games with not having the ball the majority of the time, but that's in the minority. So Oregon, if they have the ball the majority of the time and they're not holding it, and they're not just doing, they're just running, being lackadaisical with the ball and having pointless drives. But if they're going down and having, going from the 25, and this ties into field position as well. And if Oregon is going down full field every single time and putting up 7 points, no matter what the time of possession looks like, Oregon will win that game. So Indiana needs to step up on defense and almost realize, whether it's conditioning, whether it's what defensive packages Cignetti and the defensive coordinator pulls up, whatever it may be, that the defense needs to stay engaged the whole length of the field, because Oregon will try to drive them down the field. And I think Indiana is prepared to be on the field for a long amount of time, but they need to be able to hold their composure the whole time and not play sloppy down the stretch of this game and down the stretch of drives in this game. The FanDuel spread, like the first matchup in the Fiesta Bowl, for the Peach Bowl, the FanDuel spread sits at 3.5 points, favoring Indiana. And I don't agree with it. I think Indiana should be favored a little bit more. Why do I think that? Well, the BTN has Indiana favored by 8.5 points leading into this matchup. And that's not me saying that the BTN is perfect. I do think that this line should probably sit at 5.5 to 6.5 points for Indiana, winning by, 6 points or 7 points, whatever it may be. I think that would be the more appropriate line. Now, when it comes to me picking the game, I'm picking based off of those FanDuel spreads, and I would be picking Indiana to win and Indiana to cover. If I were to pick it based off the BTN spread, do I think Indiana would win and cover 8.5 points? I don't think they would cover 8.5 points. I see Indiana winning by a touchdown, though. So, and that equates to them covering a spread of 3.5. So that's how my picking would go for that Peach Bowl. Indiana to win, and for Indiana to cover the spread of 3.5 points. With that being said, that's all we have for today's college football playoff semifinals review, preview, predictions, and picks show. The special college football playoff semifinal special, whatever you want to call it. That's all we have for the episode. This will be the second episode of the Ben Drury Show. I just recorded, and you can tell my voice is a little hoarse. It's late at night. I just recorded a Mizzou basketball reaction show, so make sure to go check that out. But it's the second episode of the day for the Ben Drury Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. I want to give a quick reminder. Please subscribe to the channel right now. Down below, press that red button for all sports content. We're going to talk about all sports. We're talking about college football today. We talked about college basketball. We'll talk about the NFL with the NFL playoffs. We'll talk about the MLB later on. We'll talk about all different ranges of sports. We'll talk about track and field in the spring. It's coming up. I run track and field. I run a track and field media company, Kicking for Home Track and Field Media, which you can follow now. Subtle plug. But we'll talk about that on the Ben Drury Show, whatever it may be. But all you need to know is that the Ben Drury Show is your home for all sports coverage of all sports, all levels, whatever it may be. And so make sure to subscribe, keep those post notifications on to keep you updated with all the latest the Ben Drury Show has to offer. Now, that's all we have for today's second episode of the Ben Drury Show. With that being said, I'm Ben Drury. Good night.